Loneliness is not an accident. It is the mathematical result of moving at a speed your environment cannot survive. People love to believe that isolation happens because something went wrong, because you failed to connect, failed to adapt, failed to be likable enough to be kept. That belief is comforting because it preserves the illusion that belonging is the default state and exclusion is the exception. It is not. Belonging only exists as long as you remain predictable. The moment your priorities shift, your rhythm changes. Your tolerance for triviality drops. The system around you begins to reject you quietly, efficiently, without drama. No one announces it. No one confronts you. There is no final argument. No betrayal scene. No explanation. There is only absence. Messages slow down. Invitations stop arriving. Your name fades from conversations you no longer hear. And because humans are conditioned to personalize silence, you assume guilt, you assume loss, you assume defect. That assumption is the first lie society teaches you to keep you in line. Groups are not built to support growth. They are built to preserve equilibrium. Every social circle, workplace, family structure, or friendship network has an unspoken agreement: we move together, or we do not move at all. When one individual accelerates mentally, emotionally, strategically, they become destabilizing. Not dangerous, not evil, simply inconvenient. And inconvenient elements are removed, not attacked, erased. This is why isolation often follows clarity, not confusion, not weakness. Clarity. When you stop laughing at what no longer amuses you, when you stop investing energy into conversations that recycle the same complaints, when you stop trading your time for acceptance, the system senses the deviation immediately. You are no longer synchronized. And desynchronization is intolerable to the collective. The mistake is thinking you were pushed out. You were not. You walked ahead. And when distance appears, the crowd pretends you chose loneliness because admitting the truth would force them to confront their own stagnation. It is easier to label you distant than to admit you outgrew the room. Isolation is not a punishment. It is feedback. It tells you exactly where you no longer belong. It reveals the invisible contracts you unknowingly signed when you needed approval. Contracts that expire the moment you stop paying with attention, compliance, and emotional availability. Most people never experience this stage because they never break pace. They adapt, compromise, soften their edges, lower their standards, and call it maturity. What they are really doing is slowing down to avoid being left alone. You did the opposite. And now the silence feels hostile because no one taught you what silence actually means. Silence is not emptiness. It is space. Space that only appears when noise is no longer tolerated. Space that exposes how much of your identity was built in reaction to others instead of intention. That exposure is uncomfortable. So the mind searches for someone to blame. But there is no villain here. Only cause and effect. If you are isolated now, it is because the version of you that fit is already dead. The environment simply hasn't caught up to the fact yet. Most people do not lose relationships because they change. They lose them because they stop being useful in the same way. This is the part few are willing to admit, because it dismantles the comforting fantasy that connection is built on mutual appreciation. It is not. The majority of human bonds are transactional long before they are emotional. The transaction is simply disguised well enough that people call it friendship, loyalty, or chemistry instead of what it actually is: exchange. Attention for attention, validation for validation, presence for distraction, energy for emotional dumping. You listen, you nod, you agree, you stay available, and in return you are included. As long as this balance holds, the relationship feels stable. Not deep, not profound. Stable. And stability is mistaken for meaning. The moment you withdraw one side of the exchange, everything collapses. Not slowly, immediately. And this is where people become confused. They think something broke. They think someone changed. They think they made a mistake. What actually happened is simpler. The contract expired. Most relationships are not designed to survive growth. They are designed to maintain comfort. When you start prioritizing your time, your focus, your inner development, you reduce your availability. You listen less to recycled complaints. You laugh less at jokes you have heard 100 times. You stop responding instantly. You stop filling silence. And without realizing it, You violate the unspoken agreement. You are no longer feeding the dynamic. People rarely confront this directly because confrontation would require honesty. And honesty would require admitting that they were not there for you, but for how you made them feel about themselves. So instead of confrontation, they retreat. Quietly, politely, with excuses that sound reasonable enough to avoid guilt. It's not personal. We're just busy. Life happens. These phrases are shields. They protect self-image, because saying you no longer serve the role I needed you to play would expose the nature of the bond. And most people are not prepared to see themselves that clearly. What hurts is not the disappearance. What hurts is the realization that the bond did not exist in the way you believed. That realization creates cognitive dissonance. You replay memories. You analyze conversations. You search for hidden signals. You ask yourself where you went wrong. That questioning is not a sign of weakness. It is the mind trying to reconcile illusion with reality. The truth is uncomfortable because it forces you to admit something about your past self. You were participating too. You accepted shallow exchanges because they filled space. You tolerated low-quality connection because it felt better than emptiness. You traded depth for proximity. And as long as you were willing to do that, people stayed. When you stop, they leave. This is why growth is often followed by loss. Not because growth repels people, but because growth removes your tolerance for being used subtly. And once that tolerance is gone, the entire structure collapses. Notice how rarely people leave when you need them. They leave when you no longer need them in the same way. Need creates leverage. Independence removes it. When you stop seeking constant affirmation, when you stop needing someone to witness every thought, every emotion, every moment, the bond loses its grip. There is nothing to pull on anymore. This is also why people mislabel these losses as betrayal. Betrayal implies a promise. Most of these relationships never had one. They were arrangements sustained by habit and convenience. No oath was broken, only expectations that were never agreed upon in words. Understanding this changes the emotional equation. Instead of mourning people, you mourn the version of yourself that needed them. The one who believed proximity equaled value. The one who confused familiarity with loyalty. That version does not survive growth, and it cannot come with you. This is where many people panic and attempt to repair what was never solid. They reach out. They over-explain. They try to be more accommodating again. Not because they miss the people, but because they fear the implication of being alone. They fear what it says about them. They fear that solitude confirms some internal defect. So they renegotiate the contract. They make themselves useful again. And the people return, smiling, relieved, comfortable. The system stabilizes. Growth stops. Those who do not go back experience a different phase, a colder one. They begin to see patterns they were blind to before. How often conversations revolved around others' needs. How rarely curiosity flowed in both directions. How conditional warmth really was. This awareness does not make you bitter, it makes you precise. Precision is dangerous to shallow systems. Once you see relationships as exchanges, not fairy tales, you stop chasing closure. There is nothing to close. You stop demanding explanations. None will satisfy you. And you stop blaming yourself for the withdrawal of others. Because you understand that absence is not an accusation. It is an outcome. This is not a call to reject connection. It is a recognition of reality. Real connection is rare precisely because it does not collapse when usefulness shifts. It survives silence. It survives distance. It survives periods when nothing is gained. Most bonds do not qualify. And that realization is what truly isolates you. Not emotionally, but perceptually. You can no longer unsee the mechanics. You can no longer pretend every smile means loyalty. You can no longer confuse being wanted with being valued. Once you understand this, loneliness stops feeling like rejection and starts feeling like alignment. Fewer people fit, because fewer people ever did. Loneliness is the moment the herd loses its grip on you, and that loss feels violent because the herd has been deciding for you longer than you want to admit. Most people believe they make choices. They don't. They adjust. They scan faces, read reactions, measure pauses, sense approval or disapproval before a single word is spoken. The crowd does not need to speak to control you. A raised eyebrow is enough. A delayed reply is enough. A subtle shift in tone is enough. From childhood, You are trained to interpret these signals and correct yourself automatically. That is how the herd governs without force. The fear that drives this system is not fear of being alone. It is fear of being excluded. Exclusion means loss of protection, loss of identity, loss of mirrors that tell you who you are. So people compromise early. They soften opinions. They dilute ambitions. They laugh when something isn't funny. They agree when something feels wrong. Not because they believe, but because they want to stay inside the circle. This is why values are negotiable for most people. Not because they lack morals, but because belonging feels more urgent than integrity. Being inside feels safer than being right. Over time, these small compromises stack, and eventually, the person no longer knows where their real boundaries are. They only know what keeps them included. Loneliness interrupts this process. When the audience disappears, the performance collapses. Without eyes watching, there is no script to follow, no feedback loop, no instant correction. And that is when the real discomfort begins. Not the absence of people, but the absence of guidance. You realize how many of your preferences were reactions, how many of your goals were borrowed, how much of your personality was calibrated to be acceptable rather than accurate. This is the identity crisis no one warns you about. When the herd steps away, you don't immediately feel free. You feel lost. Because the herd was not just company, it was structure. There are two ways people experience this stage. The first is passive loneliness. This is the kind that waits. Waits for messages, waits for invitations, waits to be chosen again. Passive loneliness is still herd dependent. It hurts because the person is not truly alone. They are suspended. Their attention is still outward. Their sense of self is still waiting for external confirmation. This form of loneliness breeds anxiety, resentment, and self-doubt. It asks the same question repeatedly: what did I do wrong? The second is active loneliness. This is separation by decision, not by rejection. Active loneliness turns attention inward, not to self-pity, but to reconstruction. It accepts the silence instead of trying to fill it. It uses the absence of noise to observe patterns, motivations, impulses. It does not rush to replace people. It allows the vacuum to expose what was always there but never audible. Most people cannot tolerate this phase, not because it is painful, but because it is quiet. And quiet removes distractions. In that silence, unresolved fears surface. Insecurities that were numbed by constant interaction come alive. Questions that were postponed demand answers. Who am I when no one reacts to me? What do I want when no one is watching? What do I believe when agreement no longer matters? This is where the emptiness comes from. It is not a lack, it is withdrawal. Social validation functions like a drug. Small doses, delivered frequently. A message, a laugh, a like, a nod of agreement. Each one reassures the nervous system you are accepted. You are safe. You exist. When that stream stops, the body panics. The mind interprets it as danger. That panic is mislabeled as loneliness, but it is closer to detox. And like all detox, the first instinct is relapse. Most people return to the herd not because they miss others, but because they cannot stand themselves without mirrors. They confuse discomfort with failure. They assume silence means something is wrong, so they run back to familiar noise, even if that noise requires shrinking again. Those who don't return go through something colder: responsibility. When there is no group to blame, no expectations to hide behind, no roles to perform, every choice becomes yours. Your stagnation is yours. Your confusion is yours. Your direction, or lack of it, is yours. This is the point where excuses die, not because someone challenged them, but because there is no one left to convince. That is why true loneliness is unbearable for the unprepared. It removes the final buffer between you and yourself, but it is also the moment real autonomy begins. Not the illusion of independence while still seeking approval, but the capacity to stand without witnesses, to think without checking alignment, to move without consensus. The herd calls this arrogance, coldness, detachment. What it really is withdrawal from unconscious influence. Loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of permission. And when permission is gone, so is blame. Power is not built in rooms full of people. It is built in places the crowd never looks. Modern culture sells a comforting lie that visibility equals influence. that connection equals leverage, that the more people know your name, the more powerful you become. This belief keeps people busy networking, performing, maintaining relevance. It also keeps them weak, because dependence is the opposite of power. No matter how polished it looks, true power does not come from how many people recognize you. It comes from how few you actually need. Networking creates surface access, not control. It ties your progress to availability, approval, timing, and perception. Every relationship becomes a variable you must manage. Every move must be explained, justified, softened. This is not leverage. This is fragility disguised as social intelligence. Power operates differently. It grows where observation is minimal and interference is impossible. It forms when your thinking is uninterrupted, your decisions are not negotiated, and your execution is not delayed by consensus. None of this happens in crowds. Crowds distort. They inject noise, doubt, and urgency that has nothing to do with your objectives. Loneliness is what removes that distortion. In isolation, three things emerge naturally. First, thought without contamination. When there are no constant inputs, opinions stop colliding with yours. You are no longer adjusting ideas in real time to be palatable. You can follow a line of reasoning to its end without interrupting yourself to consider how it will be received. This depth is impossible when you are constantly observed. Most people never think clearly, not because they lack intelligence, but because they never stop being watched. Second, decision without permission. Groups require alignment. Alignment requires compromise. Compromise delays action. When you are alone, decisions are no longer social events. There is no pre-approval phase, no expectation management, no emotional cushioning. You decide, and then you live with the consequences. This sharpens judgment faster than any feedback loop ever could. Third, rhythm without drag. Groups move at the speed of the slowest emotional response. Someone hesitates, someone doubts, someone needs reassurance. Momentum dies quietly that way. Alone, your pace is dictated only by your capacity, not by collective comfort. This is why individuals who build in silence often appear to suddenly emerge far ahead. Nothing about it was sudden. It was uninterrupted. Society senses this independence instinctively, and it does not like it. People who do not seek constant inclusion are labeled quickly cold, arrogant, distant, unapproachable. These labels are defensive reactions, not observations. They are how the group explains behavior it cannot influence. Because someone who does not require approval cannot be corrected with disapproval. Someone who does not need to belong cannot be threatened with exclusion. This is what truly unsettles people. Not ambition, not success. Detachment. Belonging is the primary control mechanism of social systems. It is how norms are enforced without force. Step out of line, and warmth is withdrawn. Approval dries up, invitations stop. For those who need connection to feel real, this is unbearable. For someone who has already learned to stand alone, it is irrelevant. That is why independence is perceived as danger. It breaks the feedback loop. It removes the incentive to comply. And without compliance, manipulation fails. This is the essence of Machiavellian clarity. The individual who does not need to be loved cannot be steered by affection. The one who does not fear isolation cannot be disciplined by abandonment. Influence has no leverage when dependence is absent. Power, then, is not antisocial. It is anti-reliance. This does not mean rejecting all connection. It means reversing the order. You do not build yourself to be accepted. You build yourself to be sufficient. Connections that remain after that are not supports. They are additions. Most people chase applause because applause reassures them they exist, but applause fades. It always does. What lasts is what was built when no one was watching. When you no longer need the crowd to witness your progress, you gain the freedom to move in directions the crowd would never approve of. And that freedom is the foundation of anything durable. When you stop performing, you start constructing. And what you construct in silence does not collapse when the noise moves on. Loneliness is not the destination. It is the checkpoint. And this is where most people fail without ever realizing they were being tested. After isolation comes a choice. Not a dramatic one, not a heroic one. A quiet, internal decision that no one else will witness. You either return to what is familiar, or you continue forward into something irreversible. Both paths are valid. Both have costs. What matters is that one preserves comfort, and the other eliminates the option of retreat. The first path is the return. You go back to the crowd, not necessarily to the same people, but to the same structure. You soften again. You explain yourself more. You become available. You laugh when expected. You accept the rules you briefly stepped outside of, and the system welcomes you back with relief. Not because you were missed, but because equilibrium has been restored. This path feels good at first. The silence ends. The mirrors return. You are reflected again. You feel real, seen, included. Responsibility disperses back into the group. Decisions become shared. Doubt becomes manageable because it is no longer yours alone. The price is subtle but permanent. You must compress yourself to fit. Not dramatically, incrementally. One compromise at a time. Nothing breaks. Nothing explodes. You simply never fully expand again. And because the cost is paid slowly, most people call this maturity, balance, or realism. The second path is continuation. You do not replace the crowd. You do not rush to belong again. You accept that there will be no immediate reward for staying alone. No applause, no reassurance, no confirmation that you are doing the right thing. Only direction without witnesses. This path is colder, because once you take it seriously, something changes internally. You stop expecting rescue. You stop waiting to be chosen. You stop explaining yourself to imaginary judges. And with that, a psychological door closes behind you. This is what makes the path irreversible. When you have built even a small part of yourself without external validation, returning to dependency feels unbearable, not painful, inauthentic. You can still socialize. You can still connect. But you cannot unknow what you now know. You cannot unsee the mechanics. You cannot pretend that belonging is neutral. The cost here is heavier up front. There is no shared blame. No group narrative to hide inside. Every failure is yours. Every delay is yours. Every weakness is exposed without cushioning. You must confront yourself without distraction. And many people discover they do not like what they find. That is why most turn back. They say they chose balance. They say they value connection. They say independence is overrated. What they rarely admit is that they were exhausted by the weight of self-direction. Because freedom is not light. It demands structure from within. And most people are not trained for that. Those who continue do so not because they are braver, but because something inside them has already detached. They are no longer trying to prove anything. They are no longer negotiating identity. They are no longer asking for permission to exist as they are. This is where the crowd becomes irrelevant. Not hated, not rejected, simply unnecessary. From the outside, this looks like arrogance, distance, coldness. In reality, it is resolution. The person is no longer split between who they are and who they need to be accepted. There is only one version left, and that version cannot go back without self-betrayal. This is the final separation. Not from people, but from the need to be named by them. Most people need to be called something to feel real. Friend, partner, colleague, insider, chosen, without a label reflected back at them. They feel invisible, and invisibility feels like death to a social animal. But there is another state beyond that fear, where not being called feels neutral, where silence is not interpreted as judgment, where identity is not outsourced. Very few reach it. Not because it is rare, but because it requires letting go of something most people protect at all costs: recognition. Loneliness reveals this truth without negotiation. It strips away the audience and waits. What you do next defines the rest of your trajectory. Not everyone can live without being called. Not everyone should try. And that is the line. Nothing more needs to be said.